I never thought I would be the kind of person to get into a legal battle with my neighborhood homeowners association. But here I am, sitting in a lawyer's office because some busybody named Patricia decided my storm shelter was an eyesore that needed to be moved off my own property. Let me back up a bit. My name is Henry Anderson, and I live in Norman, Oklahoma, which for those of you who don't know, sits right in the heart of Tornado Alley. I moved here 3 years ago for a job opportunity at the University of Oklahoma, and I bought a nice little ranch-style house in a development called Prairie View Estates. The house was perfect, the neighbors seemed friendly enough, and the HOA fees were reasonable at $75 a month. I should have known that reasonable fees don't always mean reasonable people. Oklahoma weather is no joke. If you have never experienced tornado season in the Great Plains, consider yourself lucky. The sky turns green, the sirens wail, and you have maybe 15 minutes to get underground before a mile-wide funnel cloud turns your entire life into kindling. So when I moved here, the first thing I did after unpacking was research storm shelters. I was not about to rely on a bathtub and a mattress when an EF5 tornado decided to pay a visit. I spent weeks researching different types of shelters. There were above-ground safe rooms in ground shelters, garage installations, and standalone units. I eventually settled on an in-ground shelter from a reputable company out of Oklahoma City. The thing was built like a tank, rated to withstand an EF5 with wind speeds up to 200 miles per hour. It was a concrete and steel reinforced unit that would be installed in my backyard, with a reinforced door that sat flush with the ground when closed. The installation crew came out in early March 2023, just before storm season kicked into high gear. They dug a hole about 8 feet deep near the back corner of my property, right along my property line. I had specifically chosen that location because it was the furthest point from my house, which meant if my house collapsed during a tornado, the debris was less likely to block the shelter entrance. It also happened to be near a sturdy oak tree that had been there for probably 50 years, providing some additional protection from flying debris. The crew finished the installation in 2 days. They poured the concrete, set the shelter, installed the reinforced hatch, and even landscaped around it so it blended in with my yard. I was thrilled. I finally felt safe. I could actually sleep at night during storm season instead of lying awake every time the weather app pinged with a severe thunderstorm warning. For the first year, everything was fine. I used the shelter twice during particularly nasty storms, and both times I was grateful to have it. My neighbors on either side, the Johnsons and the Martins, thought it was a great idea. Ed Johnson even asked me for the company's contact information because he wanted to get one installed too. Then, Patricia Whitmore became the HOA president. Patricia was one of those women who had clearly peaked in high school and spent the rest of her life trying to recapture that feeling of power and importance. She was in her mid-50s, had that aggressive blonde bob haircut that seemed to be issued to every Karen in America, and she drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I speak to managers for a living." I'm not even kidding about that last part. She had moved into Prairie View Estates about 6 months after I did, into one of the larger houses on the opposite end of the development. I had maybe interacted with her 3 times before she became HOA president, and each time had been unpleasant. Once she complained that my grass was a 1/4 inch too long, even though I had literally mowed it the day before. Another time she left a note on my door saying my garbage cans were visible from the street, even though it was garbage day and they were at the curb where they were supposed to be. When she announced she was running for HOA president, I did not vote for her. Neither did most of my immediate neighbors. But Prairie View Estates had about 200 homes, and voter turnout was abysmal. Only about 30 people bothered to vote, and Patricia won with 17 votes. 17 votes out of 200 households, and suddenly she had the power to make everyone's lives miserable. Her reign of terror started small. New rules about holiday decorations, restrictions on what colors you could paint your front door, a ban on basketball hoops in driveways. People grumbled, but most just complied because it was easier than fighting. I kept my head down and figured as long as I followed the rules, she would leave me alone. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in April 2024 when I got the letter. I came home from work, grabbed my mail, and there it was. An official notice from the Prairie View Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Patricia Whitmore, president. The letter stated that my storm shelter was in violation of HOA bylaws and needed to be relocated within 30 days. I read it 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding something. The letter cited Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant, which stated that no permanent structures may be placed within 3 feet of property lines without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I immediately went to my filing cabinet and pulled out all my closing documents from when I bought the house. I found the HOA covenant and flipped to Section 12, Paragraph 4. Sure enough, there was the rule about permanent structures and property lines. But I also found something interesting. The rule had been amended in January 2024, 3 months earlier. When I had installed my shelter in March 2023, there had been no such rule. The old version of the covenant only restricted structures within 1 foot of property lines, and my shelter was a good 18 inches from the actual boundary. I called the HOA office the next morning. A bored-sounding woman named Linda answered and transferred me to Patricia after I explained why I was calling. "Mr. Anderson, yes, I have been expecting your call," Patricia said in that syrupy, sweet voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. "I assume you received our notice about your non-compliant structure." I did, and I have some questions about it. First, this rule was not in effect when I installed my shelter. Second, my shelter was compliant with the rules that existed at the time of installation. And third, this is a tornado shelter. It is a safety feature, not a decorative structure. "Mr. Anderson, the rules are very clear. All structures must comply with current HOA standards, regardless of when they were installed. You have 30 days to relocate your shelter to a compliant location or face fines of $100 per day." That is ridiculous. Do you have any idea how much it costs to relocate an in-ground storm shelter? We are talking about excavating tons of earth, moving a structure that weighs several thousand pounds, and then filling in the old hole and installing it somewhere else. That is easily a $15,000 to $20,000 job. That is not the HOA's concern, Mr. Anderson. You should have obtained proper approval before installing the structure. There was nothing to approve. I was following the rules as they existed. The rules have changed. You have 30 days. Good day, Mr. Anderson. She hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, absolutely fuming. This was insane. I started doing research, reading through every page of the HOA covenant, the Oklahoma Homeowners Association Act, and any case law I could find about HOA disputes. The more I read, the angrier I got. That weekend, I drove over to Ed Johnson's house and told him what was happening. Ed was retired military, a straight shooter who did not have much patience for bureaucratic nonsense. "That is absolute horse manure," he said, shaking his head. "Patricia is on a power trip. She has been harassing half the neighborhood with these petty complaints." Last month she tried to fine the Robinsons because their rose bushes were blooming pink instead of red, said it did not match the neighborhood aesthetic. Can she actually enforce this? I asked. Unfortunately, yes. HOAs in Oklahoma have a lot of power. They can place liens on your property if you do not pay fines. But the thing is, they also have to follow their own rules. You said this bylaw was amended after you installed your shelter. Yeah, by about 9 months. Then they cannot apply it retroactively. That is basic contract law. You entered into an agreement based on the rules as they existed. They cannot change the rules and then penalize you for something you did before the change. That is what I thought, but Patricia doesn't seem to care about that logic. Then you need to fight her on it. Go to the next HOA meeting and make your case publicly. Get your neighbors on your side. Patricia only has power because nobody challenges her. Ed was right, but I also knew that fighting an HOA dispute could turn into a long, expensive nightmare. Still, I was not about to spend $20,000 relocating a perfectly functional storm shelter just because Patricia Whitmore wanted to flex her authority. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the first Wednesday of May. I marked it on my calendar and started preparing my case. I made copies of the old and new versions of the bylaw, highlighted the relevant sections, and put together a timeline showing when my shelter was installed versus when the rule changed. I also started talking to my neighbors. It turned out I was not the only person Patricia had been targeting. The Martins had received a violation notice because they had installed solar panels on their roof without HOA approval, even though there was no rule requiring such approval. The Robinsons were fighting a fine over their pink roses. A guy named Tom who lived 2 streets over was being harassed because he parked his work truck in his own driveway, and Patricia claimed it violated a rule about commercial vehicles, even though Tom's truck was just a regular F-150 with his company logo on the door. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had about 15 neighbors who were fed up with Patricia's antics and ready to show up in support. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a bland beige building near the development's entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the place already packed. Apparently, word had spread that there was going to be a showdown, and people wanted to see it. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with 2 other board members. A mousy woman named Deanne who seemed terrified of Patricia, and a guy named Carl who looked like he would rather be literally anywhere else. Patricia had a stack of papers in front of her, and that satisfied smile of someone who thinks they hold all the cards. This meeting of the Prairie View Estates Homeowners Association will now come to order, Patricia announced, banging a gavel like she was a judge. We have several items on the agenda tonight, but first we will hear public comments. Please keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. I raised my hand immediately. Patricia's smile tightened when she saw me. Mr. Anderson, how lovely of you to join us. Please come to the front. I walked up to the table, very aware of everyone's eyes on me. I had my folder of documents clutched in my hand, and I could feel my heart pounding. I am not naturally confrontational, but this situation had pushed me past my limit. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am here to contest the violation notice I received regarding my storm shelter. As many of you know, I installed an in-ground tornado shelter in my backyard in March of 2023. This shelter is a safety feature designed to protect myself and my neighbors in the event of a tornado. The installation was done professionally by a licensed company and was in full compliance with all HOA rules as they existed at that time. I pulled out the documents and held them up. In January 2024, the HOA board amended Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our covenant to extend the setback requirement from 1 foot to 3 feet. My shelter, which is 18 inches from the property line, was compliant under the old rule, but is now allegedly non-compliant under the new rule. However, it is well-established legal precedent that rule changes cannot be applied retroactively to existing structures. I installed my shelter in good faith, following all applicable rules, and I should not be penalized because the rules changed after the fact. I could see several people in the audience nodding. Patricia's face had gone tight and pinched. Mr. Anderson, the board's position is that all structures must meet current standards. This is for the safety and aesthetic consistency of our neighborhood. Safety. Patricia, this is a tornado shelter. It literally exists to keep people safe. And as for aesthetics, the thing is underground. You cannot even see it unless you are standing right next to it. The rules are the rules, Mr. Anderson. Then let us talk about the rules. According to the Oklahoma Homeowners Association Act, any amendment to HOA covenants must be approved by a vote of the membership. Was this amendment put to a vote? Patricia's face flushed. The board has the authority to make reasonable amendments to maintain community standards. Actually, according to our own covenant, amendments to the Architectural Standards section require a vote of at least 51% of homeowners. Did that happen? Silence. I will take that as a no, I continued. Which means this amendment was implemented improperly and may not even be valid. But even if it were valid, it still cannot be applied retroactively. You cannot fine me for violating a rule that did not exist when I built my shelter. The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia banged her gavel. Order. Order, Mr. Anderson, your 3 minutes are up. This matter will be taken under advisement by the board. Taken under advisement. You gave me 30 days to relocate my shelter or face fines. I think I deserve a better answer than that. The board's decision stands. Next speaker, please. I wanted to argue more, but Ed caught my eye from the audience and gave me a small shake of his head. I returned to my seat, frustrated but not surprised. People like Patricia did not back down just because you embarrassed them in public. If anything, I had probably just made things worse. Sure enough, 2 weeks later I received another letter. This one informed me that the board had reviewed my concerns and determined that their decision stood. I now had 2 weeks remaining to relocate my shelter or face fines of $100 per day. Additionally, the letter stated that if I failed to comply, the HOA would place a lien on my property. I knew then that I needed a lawyer. I found an attorney named Michael Brennan who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Oklahoma City, about 20 minutes from my house. Michael was in his early 40s, had an easy smile, and seemed genuinely interested in my case when I laid out the situation. This is actually pretty cut and dry, he said after reviewing my documents. Your HOA board overstepped their authority in multiple ways. First, they amended the covenant without proper authorization. Second, they are attempting to apply that amendment retroactively. And third, they are threatening you with unreasonable fines for a structure that serves a legitimate safety purpose. Oklahoma actually has specific statutes protecting homeowners who install storm shelters. Really? Oh yeah. After the Moore tornado in 2013, the legislature passed several laws to encourage people to install storm shelters. There is actually a provision that prohibits HOAs from unreasonably restricting the installation of tornado shelters. Your HOA is not just violating basic contract law, they are also potentially violating state statute. So what do? First, I am going to send them a cease and desist letter. We will lay out all the legal issues with their position and give them an opportunity to back down. If they do not, we will file a lawsuit. Based on what you have told me, I think we have an excellent chance of not only stopping them from fining you but also potentially recovering your attorney fees. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $3,000. If this goes to court, you are probably looking at another $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees, depending on how long it drags out. But like I said, if we win, we can ask the court to make the HOA pay your legal costs. I swallowed hard. $3,000 just to get started. But what choice did I have? If I caved to Patricia now, she would just keep coming after me for something else. And if the HOA placed a lien on my property, it could affect my ability to sell the house or refinance my mortgage. Okay. Let us do it. Michael drafted a strongly worded cease and desist letter and sent it via certified mail to the HOA board and to Patricia personally. The letter outlined all the legal deficiencies in their position and demanded that they immediately withdraw the violation notice and agree not to pursue any fines or liens. The response came a week later, and it was not from Patricia. It was from a law firm in Tulsa representing the HOA. Their letter basically said that the board stood by its decision and was prepared to defend its position in court. Well, they called our bluff, Michael said when I forwarded him the response. Looks like we are going to have to file suit. Over the next month, Michael prepared a complaint and filed it in Cleveland County District Court. We sued the HOA board for declaratory judgment, seeking a court order stating that the amended bylaw was invalid and that I was not in violation of any HOA rules. We also asked for an injunction preventing the HOA from imposing any fines or liens while the case was pending. The HOA, represented by their fancy Tulsa law firm, filed a response denying everything and claiming they had every right to enforce their rules as they saw fit. They also filed a counterclaim, arguing that I was the one in violation and seeking an order requiring me to relocate my shelter. The judge assigned to our case was a woman named Judge Rebecca Santos. She had a reputation for being no-nonsense and not tolerating frivolous arguments from either side. Our first hearing was scheduled for late July. In the meantime, life in Prairie View Estates had become distinctly uncomfortable. Patricia made sure everyone knew I was suing the HOA, and she framed it as me trying to destroy the neighborhood. She sent out an email blast to all residents claiming that I was driving up HOA costs with frivolous litigation, and that everyone's dues might have to increase to pay for the legal defense. Some of my neighbors bought into her narrative. I started getting dirty looks at the grocery store and the gas station. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield calling me a selfish jerk, but I also had plenty of support. Ed Johnson organized a group of about 20 homeowners who were fed up with Patricia's leadership, and they started attending every HOA meeting to question her decisions. The preliminary hearing in July was mostly procedural. Both sides presented their basic arguments, and Judge Santos asked some pointed questions. She seemed particularly interested in the fact that the bylaw amendment had not been properly voted on by the membership. Miss Whitmore, the judge said, addressing Patricia directly since she had chosen to attend the hearing. Can you provide documentation showing that this amendment was approved by the required percentage of homeowners? Patricia's lawyer, a slick guy named Richard Sutton, jumped in before she could answer. Your Honor, the board maintains that this amendment falls under their general authority to establish and enforce architectural standards. No membership vote was required. Counsel, I have read your covenant. Section 12 explicitly states that amendments to the architectural standards require a majority vote of the membership. Do you have evidence that such a vote occurred? We believe the board acted within their discretionary authority. That is not what I asked. Do you have evidence of a vote? No, Your Honor. Judge Santos made a note on her pad. I am going to grant Mr. Anderson's motion for a preliminary injunction. The HOA is prohibited from imposing any fines or liens related to the storm shelter pending resolution of this case. We will have a full hearing on the merits in 90 days. Both parties should be prepared to present evidence regarding the validity of the amendment and whether Mr. Anderson's shelter constitutes a violation. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Patricia looked like she had swallowed a lemon as we left the courtroom. She is not going to let this go, I told Michael as we walked to the parking lot. Probably not, but we are in a good position. The judge clearly has concerns about how this amendment was implemented. Summer dragged on. Storm season had me using my shelter twice more. Once in June when a tornado touched down about 5 miles from my neighborhood, and again in July during a particularly nasty squall line. Each time I climbed down into that shelter, I felt a mixture of gratitude that I had it and anger that I was having to fight for my right to keep it. In August, things took an unexpected turn. I came home from work one evening to find police cars in my driveway. My first thought was that I had been robbed, but then I saw Patricia standing on my front lawn talking to 2 officers. What is going on? I asked, approaching the group. One of the officers, a young guy with a crew cut, turned to me. Are you Henry Anderson? Yes, what is this about? We received a report that you have been harassing Miss Whitmore here, making threats, sending hostile messages, that sort of thing. I stared at Patricia in disbelief. That is absolutely not true. I have not contacted her at all outside of the HOA legal proceedings. Mr. Anderson has been sending me threatening emails, Patricia said, pulling out her phone. Look, I have them right here. She showed the phone to the officers. I could not see the screen, but I could see their expressions change as they read whatever was displayed. Mr. Anderson, these messages are pretty hostile. They contain threats of physical violence. I never sent her any messages. This is completely fabricated. The emails are coming from your email address, the older officer said, showing me the phone screen. Sure enough, there were 3 emails, all sent from an address that looked like mine, containing increasingly hostile and threatening language. The last one said something about showing up at her house and making her regret her actions. That is not my email address, I said, examining it more closely. Look, it is similar but not exactly the same. My address is henryanderson.73@gmail, but that one is henryanderson.37@gmail. Someone created a fake account to frame me. The officers looked at each other. Do you have your phone on you? The older one asked. I pulled out my phone and showed them my actual email account. I opened my sent folder to demonstrate that there were no messages to Patricia. Anyone could delete sent messages, Patricia said smugly. Actually, madam, if he deleted them, they would show up in his trash folder for 30 days, the younger officer said. He looked at me. Can you show us your trash folder? I opened it. Empty except for some junk mail I had deleted earlier that week, none of it to Patricia. The older officer's expression shifted from suspicion to irritation. Miss Whitmore, it looks like someone may have created a fake email account to impersonate Mr. Anderson. That is actually a crime. We will need to investigate this properly. But the threats, Patricia sputtered. He is clearly trying to intimidate me. If Mr. Anderson did not send these emails, then whoever did commit a crime. We will need to get a warrant to trace the IP address these messages were sent from. In the meantime, I suggest both of you avoid contact with each other. The officers took statements from both of us and left. Patricia shot me a poisonous look before getting into her Lexus and driving away. I immediately called Michael and told him what had happened. "This is actually good for us," he said. "It shows a pattern of harassment on her part. She is trying to intimidate you into dropping the lawsuit. Make sure you get a copy of the police report and forward it to me." "Do you really think she created those fake emails herself?" "Either her or someone acting on her behalf. We might want to depose her about it during discovery." The police investigation moved slowly. A detective named Martinez contacted me a few days later to ask some follow-up questions. He seemed competent and took the matter seriously, but he also warned me that tracing the emails might be difficult if the sender used a VPN or took other steps to hide their identity. Meanwhile, the HOA situation was getting worse in other ways. Patricia started nitpicking every aspect of my property. She sent me violation notices for grass clippings on my driveway, for my garbage cans being out past 6 p.m. on collection day, for a small oil stain in my driveway. Each notice came with a fine. I documented everything and forwarded it all to Michael, who added it to our evidence file as proof of retaliatory harassment. The full hearing on our lawsuit was scheduled for October. As the date approached, both sides conducted discovery. Michael deposed Patricia, Diane, and Carl from the HOA board. I had to give a deposition as well, where Richard Sutton tried to make me look like an unreasonable troublemaker. It was not fun, but Michael prepped me well, and I stuck to the facts. One interesting thing came out during Patricia's deposition. When Michael asked her about the fake emails, she claimed to have no knowledge of who might have sent them. But when he asked if she had discussed the emails with anyone before reporting them to police, she admitted to mentioning them to her son, Brandon Whitmore. Michael's eyes lit up at that admission. After the deposition, he hired a private investigator to look into Brandon. It turned out Brandon was a 28-year-old unemployed guy who lived in his mother's basement and spent most of his time online. He had a history of minor criminal offenses, including cyberstalking and harassment. "I think we found our emailer," Michael said when the PI's report came back. "Now we just need to prove it." Detective Martinez made the connection as well. He brought Brandon in for questioning, and apparently the kid cracked almost immediately. He admitted that his mother had been complaining about me constantly and had made comments about wishing I would just go away. Brandon took it upon himself to try to scare me into dropping the lawsuit by creating the fake email account and sending threats that would make me look dangerous. He had used a VPN to hide his tracks, but the detective was able to trace the emails to him through some digital forensic work. I did not fully understand. Brandon was arrested and charged with identity theft and making criminal threats. Patricia was not charged with anything, since there was no evidence she had directly asked Brandon to do it, but the optics were terrible for her. The story made the local news. HOA president's son arrested for threatening homeowner in ongoing dispute. Read the headline in the Norman transcript. Suddenly, everyone in Prairie View Estates knew the full story, and public opinion shifted dramatically against Patricia. An emergency HOA meeting was called. Over 100 homeowners showed up, and the mood was ugly. Ed Johnson stood up and made a motion to recall Patricia from the board. The motion was seconded immediately, and when the vote was called, it was nearly unanimous. Patricia was out as HOA president, effective immediately. She stood up, her face red with fury and humiliation, and pointed at me. "This is all your fault," she screamed. "You have destroyed this neighborhood. I was just trying to maintain our standards, and you turned everyone against me." "You did that yourself, Patricia," Ed said calmly. "You abused your authority and harassed your neighbors. This is exactly what you deserve." Patricia stormed out of the meeting. I heard later that she put her house up for sale the next week. With Patricia gone, the new interim board immediately moved to settle the lawsuit. They agreed to withdraw all violation notices against me, acknowledge that my storm shelter was properly installed and in compliance with HOA rules, and pay my attorney fees in full. The fake amendment to the bylaw was formally rescinded, and the board promised to put any future amendments to a membership vote as required by the covenant. The settlement was finalized in November. Michael got me a check for $14,000 to cover my legal fees and expenses, plus a written apology from the HOA board. Brandon pled guilty to his charges and got a year of probation and community service. Patricia sold her house at a loss and moved to Tulsa, where hopefully she would torture a different group of people. As for me, I finally had peace. My storm shelter remained exactly where it was, 18 inches from the property line, ready to protect me and my neighbors when the next tornado came through. Ed Johnson went ahead and got his own shelter installed, and so did 3 other families on our street. Nobody from the HOA said a word about it. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, even when it is expensive and stressful, and makes you want to just give in for the sake of an easy life. People like Patricia count on others being too tired or too scared to fight back. She got away with her petty tyranny for so long because most people just went along with her ridiculous demands. But sometimes you have to draw a line. Sometimes you have to say no, this far and no further. For me, that line was my storm shelter. It was not just about property rights or HOA rules. It was about having a safe place to go when the sky turns green and the sirens start wailing. It was about knowing that I could protect myself and the people I cared about. Nobody had the right to take that away from me, not Patricia Whitmore, not the HOA board, not anyone. I think about that sometimes when I am sitting on my back porch, looking out at my yard where the shelter hatch is barely visible among the grass. It looks so peaceful and ordinary. You would never know there is a reinforced concrete bunker down there unless someone told you. But I know it is there, and that knowledge gives me comfort. Living in Tornado Alley means accepting a certain level of risk. You watch the weather obsessively. You know the difference between a watch and a warning. You have your emergency supplies ready to go. Flashlight, water, first aid kit, battery-powered radio. You know which room in your house is the safest if you cannot make it to a shelter. You teach your kids to recognize the signs of an approaching tornado. The greenish sky, the sudden calm, the sound like a freight train approaching. But even with all those precautions, nothing beats having a proper storm shelter. I have been in mine 5 times now during actual tornado warnings, and twice there were confirmed touchdowns within 10 miles of my house. Each time I was down there, sitting on the bench in the dim light from the battery lantern, listening to the storm rage above. I was grateful. Grateful to the engineers who designed the shelter, grateful to the crew who installed it, and grateful to myself for having the foresight to get it in the first place. And now I am grateful that I fought to keep it. The new HOA board has been great. They actually listen to homeowners and try to be reasonable. They still enforce basic standards like keeping your grass mowed and not leaving trash everywhere, but they do not sweat the small stuff. They do not harass people over garbage cans or the exact shade of their front door paint. They treat residents like adults capable of making their own decisions. It is amazing how much difference leadership makes. Same neighborhood, same houses, same people, but a completely different atmosphere. People are friendlier now. There is less tension. The neighborhood Facebook group used to be a war zone of complaints and arguments, But now it is actually pleasant, mostly people sharing recommendations for contractors or asking if anyone wants to join a book club. Ed Johnson ended up getting elected as the new HOA president at the next regular election. He ran unopposed and won easily. His platform was simple: minimal interference, maximum common sense. He has been doing a great job. Under his leadership, the board has actually reduced HOA fees by $15 a month because they cut out some unnecessary expenses that Patricia had added, like paying for fancy letterhead and a professional website that nobody used. As for Patricia herself, I heard through the grapevine that she tried to pull similar stunts in her new neighborhood in Tulsa and got shut down immediately. Apparently, that HOA had experience dealing with power-hungry board members and had safeguards in place. She resigned after a few months, and I have no idea where she ended up. Part of me feels a little bad for her, because she clearly has some issues that drive her need for control. But mostly, I just feel relieved that she is gone and no longer my problem. Brandon completed his probation without incident and apparently moved to Texas to live with his father. I hope he learned his lesson about getting involved in his mother's feuds and committing crimes on her behalf. The charges will stay on his record, which might help him think twice before doing something stupid like that again. The whole ordeal took about 9 months from start to finish, from that first violation letter in April to the final settlement in November. 9 months of stress, anger, legal fees, and uncertainty. There were definitely times when I wondered if it was worth it, times when I thought about just caving in and moving the shelter to avoid the hassle. But I am glad I stuck it out. Not just because I won, but because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes I run into people from the neighborhood at the store or the gas station, and they thank me for standing up to Patricia. They tell me stories about how she harassed them or made their lives difficult, and how they wished they had fought back but did not know how. Some of them feel guilty about not supporting me more publicly during the dispute. I tell them it is okay, that I understand how intimidating it can be to go up against someone in a position of authority, especially when you are worried about protecting your own home and family. The truth is, fighting an HOA is scary. These organizations have real power. They can fine you, place liens on your property, and potentially even force you to sell your home if you do not pay their fines and fees. Most people cannot afford to hire a lawyer and spend months in litigation. I was lucky that I had some savings, and that Michael took my case because he genuinely believed I was in the right. If circumstances had been different, I might have been forced to comply with Patricia's demands, no matter how unjust they were. That is the dark side of HOAs that people do not always think about when they are buying a house. You are not just buying property, you are buying into a legal structure that gives your neighbors control over what you can do with that property. Most of the time, HOAs function reasonably well. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards, and provide amenities like pools and clubhouses. But when you get the wrong people in charge, it can turn into a nightmare very quickly. I have thought a lot about what makes someone like Patricia tick. What drives a person to become so obsessed with controlling their neighbors? I think part of it is genuine belief that they are maintaining standards and protecting property values. Patricia really did think she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she was protecting Prairie View estates from people like me who were too careless or selfish to follow the rules. The fact that I had followed the rules as they existed at the time did not matter to her, because she saw herself as the ultimate arbiter of what was right and proper. But I also think there was a lot of ego and insecurity involved. Patricia needed to feel important and powerful. She needed to be the person making decisions and telling others what to do. When I challenged her authority, it was not just about the storm shelter anymore. It became personal. It became about her winning and me losing, about proving that she was in charge and I had to fall in line. That is why she escalated things to such an absurd degree. A reasonable person would have backed down when confronted with the legal issues with her position. A reasonable person would have recognized that a storm shelter is fundamentally different from a decorative structure, and that safety should outweigh aesthetic concerns. But Patricia was not operating from a place of reason. She was operating from a place of ego, and that made her dangerous. The fake emails were probably the scariest part of the whole thing. When those police officers showed up at my house, I had a moment of genuine fear that I was going to be arrested for something I did not do. If I had not been able to prove that those emails came from a fake account, things could have gone very badly for me. I could have ended up with criminal charges, which would have destroyed my credibility in the civil lawsuit and potentially cost me my job. The fact that Patricia's son was willing to commit crimes on her behalf tells you something about the environment she created. Brandon was a grown man, but he was still so enmeshed with his mother and her grievances that he thought threatening me was a reasonable thing to do. That level of dysfunction does not develop overnight. It speaks to years of Patricia viewing the world as us versus them, where anyone who disagreed with her was an enemy who needed to be destroyed. I am just grateful that Brandon was not very good at covering his tracks, and that Detective Martinez took the investigation seriously. If Brandon had been smarter about using the VPN and other technical measures, they might never have traced those emails back to him. And if the detective had dismissed it as a civil matter and refused to investigate, Patricia might have gotten away with it. One thing this experience taught me is the importance of documentation. From the very beginning, I kept copies of everything. The original HOA covenant, the amended version, all the letters and emails, photos of my property and the shelter, receipts from the installation company, everything. When it came time to build our case, I had a complete paper trail that proved every point we needed to make. If I had been sloppy about record keeping, it would have been much harder to prove that I had acted in good faith and that the HOA was in the wrong. I also learned the value of having good neighbors who are willing to support you. Ed Johnson and the others who spoke up at that first HOA meeting, who attended hearings, who organized the recall effort against Patricia, they made all the difference. Fighting an HOA alone is almost impossible, but when you have community support, it changes the dynamic entirely. Patricia could not dismiss my concerns as just one troublemaker when she had 20 people questioning her decisions at every meeting. Another lesson: know your rights. Most people do not bother reading their HOA covenants until there is a problem, and by then, it is often too late. I was lucky that I had done my research and understood the rules well enough to spot the issues with Patricia's position. If I had not known about the requirement for membership votes on amendments or the Oklahoma statutes about storm shelters, I might have thought she was on solid legal ground and given up. If you live in an HOA, I would encourage you to do a few things. First, read your covenant and bylaws. Actually read them, do not just skim. Understand what rules apply to you and what procedures the board has to follow. Second, attend HOA meetings. I know they are boring and nobody wants to spend their evening listening to arguments about landscaping, but showing up matters. It keeps the board accountable and it gives you a sense of what is happening in your neighborhood. Third, get to know your neighbors. Build relationships so that if something does happen, you have allies you can count on. Most importantly, do not be afraid to stand up for yourself when the HOA oversteps. I'm not saying you should fight every little thing. Sometimes it is worth just going along to get along. But when it really matters, when the HOA is demanding something unreasonable or violating their own rules, you have every right to push back. Yes, it might be expensive and stressful, but so is living under the thumb of a petty tyrant who knows nobody will challenge them. As I sit here now, more than a year after this whole thing started, life has returned to normal. Storm season comes and goes. I mow my lawn and take out my trash and live my life. The storm shelter is still there, right where it has always been, 18 inches from the property line. It has saved my life at least once, during a particularly bad tornado in May 2025 that destroyed several houses a mile away from me. The sirens went off. I climbed into my shelter, and 15 minutes later it was over. When I emerged, my house was fine, just some minor damage to the roof and a lot of branches down in the yard. But those houses a mile away were gone, reduced to foundations and debris. Every time I use that shelter, I think about what would have happened if I had given in to Patricia. What if I had spent $20,000 to relocate it just to appease her? What if I had not fought back and had let them fine me into compliance? I probably would have ended up selling the house and moving somewhere else, somewhere without an HOA and their arbitrary rules. And I would have missed out on this community that has become my home. Because that is the thing, Prairie View Estates is actually a great place to live, now that Patricia is gone. The houses are well maintained, the neighborhood is safe, there are good schools nearby and parks for kids to play. Most of my neighbors are kind, reasonable people who just want to live their lives in peace. Under Ed Johnson's leadership, the HOA has become what it should be. A neutral administrative body that handles necessary tasks without interfering in people's personal decisions. I have even become more involved myself. I joined the Architectural Review Committee, which is ironic considering that was the committee that started this whole mess. But I wanted to make sure that no other homeowner would go through what I went through. When someone submits a proposal for a new structure or modification, we evaluate it based on whether it creates genuine problems for the neighborhood, not based on arbitrary aesthetic preferences. We approve storm shelters automatically. We work with homeowners to find solutions instead of just rejecting proposals out of hand. It is amazing how much goodwill that creates. People actually like their HOA now, which is not something you hear very often. We get compliments instead of complaints. People volunteer for committees instead of having to be begged to participate. The whole atmosphere has changed because we treat residents with respect and trust them to make good decisions about their own property. Looking back, I can see that the whole conflict with Patricia was really about two different visions of what an HOA should be. Her vision was top-down control, where the board dictated every detail and residents were expected to comply without question. My vision, and the vision that ultimately prevailed, was that an HOA should be a cooperative organization that exists to serve the residents, not rule over them. Neither vision is entirely right or wrong. There is a place for rules and standards. Otherwise, you end up with neighborhoods that deteriorate into chaos with junk cars on blocks and houses falling apart. But there has to be balance. There has to be reasonableness. And above all, there has to be respect for individual property rights and personal autonomy. The storm shelter was always the perfect test case for these competing visions. From Patricia's perspective, it was a structure that did not meet current standards and therefore had to be moved. End of discussion. From my perspective, it was a life-saving safety feature that I had installed properly and had every right to keep. The fact that Oklahoma law ultimately sided with my position validates that perspective, But even without that specific statute, I think basic fairness and common sense would have led to the same conclusion. I hope Patricia learned something from this experience, though I honestly doubt it. People like that rarely engage in genuine self-reflection. They are more likely to view themselves as victims of unfair persecution than to acknowledge their own role in creating conflict. But maybe I am wrong. Maybe losing her position and having to move and seeing her son get arrested was enough of a wake-up call to make her reconsider her approach to dealing with others. I genuinely hope so, for her sake, and for the sake of whoever has to deal with her in the future. As for me, I learned that I am tougher than I thought I was. I am not naturally confrontational. I do not like conflict or attention. My instinct is always to avoid problems and keep my head down. But when push came to shove, when something truly important was at stake, I found the strength to fight. I hired the lawyer, endured the depositions and hearings, dealt with the stress and uncertainty, and came out the other side intact. That is a valuable thing to learn about yourself. We do not really know what we are capable of until we are tested. This whole situation tested me in ways I never expected, and I discovered reserves of stubbornness and determination that I did not know I had. I stood up to someone who was used to getting her way through intimidation and bureaucratic power, and I won. Not because I was smarter or richer or better connected, but because I was right and I refused to back down. That is a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life. When something matters, really matters, you fight for it. You do not give up just because it is hard or expensive or stressful. You do what needs to be done, and you trust that the truth will eventually come out. And if you are really lucky, you have people like Ed Johnson and Michael Brennan, and all those neighbors who supported me, people who have your back and help you stand up to bullies and petty tyrants. None of us can fight every battle alone. We need community. We need allies. We need people who will show up at meetings and sign petitions and spread the word when something unjust is happening. So that is my story of how my HOA tried to force me to relocate my storm shelter off my own property line, and how I fought back and won. It is not the kind of story I ever expected to be part of. When I moved to Norman 3 years ago, I just wanted a nice, quiet life in a safe neighborhood. I did not set out to become the guy who took on the HOA and got the president removed from office. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you, and what matters is how you respond. I could have given in, paid the money, moved the shelter, and avoided the whole mess. But that would have been wrong, and it would have set a precedent that Patricia could push people around and get away with it. By fighting back, I not only protected my own rights, but also made things better for every other resident of Prairie View Estates. That is worth something. That is worth the stress and the legal fees and the sleepless nights wondering if I was doing the right thing. Because in the end, I was doing the right thing, and that matters. My storm shelter is still there, 18 inches from the property line, ready to protect me and my neighbors when the next tornado comes. And it is going to stay there, exactly where it is, for as long as I own this house. Nobody is going to make me move it. Not Patricia Whitmore, not any future HOA board, not anyone. That shelter represents more than just a place to hide during storms. It represents my right to make decisions about my own property. It represents my refusal to be bullied or intimidated. It represents the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it would be easier to give in. And every time I walk past that shelter hatch in my backyard, barely visible among the grass and landscaping, I smile. Because I know that I fought for it and I won. And that is a pretty good feeling.